In this video, I find out what Louis Reinhardt thinks about the BRRRR strategy, what his thoughts are on tax benefits for property investors in South Africa, as well as what his thoughts are on multi-tenanted versus single-tenant properties, and much, much more. Stay tuned. So Louis Reinhardt is a finance and property and investment expert, is that right? On YouTube.
Yeah, I try to be.
A YouTube, I forgot YouTuber out of the title as well. Yeah, so I'm so excited to have Louis in studio to answer some questions, and there's some things, Louis, that I think you can answer for our audience way better than I can do myself.
Okay.
So I love having you here, and I'd love to have your opinion on this thing. So I've built this new show based on what do you think about. So the idea is I'm going to ask you a bunch of things. What do you think about this and that and all of these things? And that will all be in your field where, where you know what to do better than I do.
Okay.
So let's get straight into it. What do you think about the BRRRR strategy? So buy, rehab,
rent out, refinance, repeat. Yeah, so that's actually what I do. I say that my strategy is the BRRRR strategy. It's always a funny name, but I think it's a great strategy to leverage property. I think the most important thing to focus on when it comes to the BRRRR strategy is to buy properties that can cash flow, so that when you eventually refinance, that the property can still cash flow. Because what happens is people buy properties, they renovate it, they rent it out, they refinance it, but it's difficult to repeat because they run out of capital. So having a property that can cash flow once you buy it, as well as once you refinance it, that's how you can repeat the process over and over. So I'm a big believer of that, but the main thing is it should cash flow.
So that is a perfect answer, I think, because what happens a lot of times is people end up in like a, in a dead end.
Dead cycle.
They've did it once. Yeah. They've done the whole process perfectly once, but now they're stuck, right?
How do you repeat it? What I've seen people do is they refinance and then they buy a car. Or they go on vacation.
Buy a boat.
Buy a boat. Yeah. So the idea is to not spend your profit on materialistic things and reinvest your profit so that you can actually grow your portfolio at the end of the day.
Yeah. What do you think about multi-tenanted properties versus single-tenanted properties?
Yeah, so I think there's room for both. It depends on your actual strategy, your age, your risk appetite, and your end goals at the end of the day. Single lets are easy, super easy to find. It's lower risk, but you don't really benefit from them in the short term. Multi-lets, on the other hand, is seen as more risky. There's more work involved, but you can actually benefit from them in the shorter term. I'm a big believer that the only way that you can find cash flow properties is going to be multi-lets. Unless you find a single let that's really, really cheap, or there's something wrong with it or whatever. Like I said, it depends on your actual situation. Some people are comfortable with single lets and the idea of a single let, and they're willing to wait longer term to benefit from these properties. But with multi-lets, you can benefit in the short term. With single lets, you're only going to benefit once the property is paid off or once you eventually retire. And I don't necessarily want to wait 30 years before I can benefit from an investment vehicle. But the cool thing is you can do both.
Yes, and offset the risk in the process.
Yeah, it depends.
What do you think of student housing as an investment?
Yeah, so student accommodation is an interesting investment style. I do think that there's a lot more capital involved and, of course, a lot more risk involved. You need to have certain skills to actually successfully invest in student accommodation. You get bursary students and private students, different market, different price classes, different areas, and so on. Again, this is something that I do. I focus on student accommodation and multi-lets. And I feel that after doing single lets, it led me to multi-lets. So I started with your traditional single let property, and I quickly realized that this isn't necessarily going to help me reach my financial goals. And this is where I discovered student accommodation and multi-let strategies. So yeah, it's not for everyone, but this is a strategy that can help you reach cash flow, passive or semi-passive income at the end of the month. But there's obviously more cost involved. It's capital intensive. You need to have a certain amount of skills before you can just do student accommodation. So it makes sense to maybe start with single lets, Go to a multi-let, go to a bigger multi-let, and then consider a full title student accommodation property, for example. It's a good investment vehicle. I'm not sure if it's the best long-term vehicle, but short-term it is really beneficial.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. What do you think about Airbnb versus just longer term rental?
Yeah, so Airbnb is also an interesting strategy. I think it's a great way to diversify a portfolio. Maybe you're someone that has multiple properties and you want to do something different. I think there's a lot of potential for Airbnbs, and specific areas do very well with Airbnbs. I think the thing that makes it a bit more challenging is it's difficult to project your income. The main concern for me and why I don't own Airbnbs at the moment, it doesn't mean I don't want to own them. I just think it's difficult to make accurate projections. For a multi-let or a single-let, I can say my income for a property will be 100,000 Rand in a year. I can only work on estimates or assumptions when it comes to Airbnbs. Again, there's also a bit of risks involved with that, but it can be quite beneficial if you run them correctly. And I think location with these are very important to make sure that you have high demand for these specific Airbnbs. Then it's a great way to make short-term income at the end of the day.
Yeah, I also think there's this thing that people miss where it's actually then a real business. You're in the hospitality business. You're not just renting out properties, and it's way less passive than any of these others.
It is an active investment, actually.
What do you think about wholesaling in South Africa? Because we all see the videos of people wholesaling in the US.
Yeah. You know, wholesaling is I think it's difficult to get started with wholesaling if you've never done it, if you haven't learned from someone and understand how the process works. I do, however, think that it's a great way to get an introduction to property without having any money. If you don't have a stable income, you don't have a credit score, or you don't have any affordability or savings, how can you get into property? Or how can you start investing in property? The only way would be to start with wholesaling, building up a reserve fund, and eventually getting into property. So I think it's a good way. I haven't done wholesaling because I never really had to get hold of a certain amount of capital. I used different investments. But I think as an individual, specifically South Africans, if you want to get started, learn how to leverage that skills to start wholesaling, because it's a great way to learn.
Yeah, I also think the most difficult part of a flip or even of an investment is to find the property, to find the right deal. So that's like almost the most essential skill.
Absolutely.
So if you can learn that while finding them for other people, it's probably a good deal, and getting paid well.
Yeah, I think like for me, for example, now I'll be able to do wholesaling really easily because I have all the skills, I know what to look for. But starting out having no skill in property, wholesaling isn't really that easy because you don't know what to look for yet. So wholesaling is great in theory, but doing it practically is difficult. So yeah, but I think it is definitely possible.
Yeah, I always say to people, if you want to learn to flip or if you want to learn to invest, just find me one deal.
Yeah,
find me one deal. I'll pay you 50,000 Rand for it.
That's a great exercise to actually get the right knowledge.
What do you think is a good way for people to start in property if they have no money?
Yeah, so I think the wholesaling is a great idea. Being a deal maker would be very beneficial. If you can find a deal for an investor and prove to them this will be a profitable deal, you don't have to risk anything. You simply find a deal, present it to an investor, and benefit from it there's a few different ways. Another option might be a rent-to-rent strategy, and this is something that works well with Airbnbs. For example, you can sublet a property with permission, of course, and then re-rent it to as a short-term rental or even as a long-term rental. And the advantage of this is you don't need any credit worthiness. You can do this with just the right networking.
What do you think is the main reason most people do not get rich from property?
I think it's a lack of education at the end of the day. You know, it sounds very cliche when I say this, but it's this whole mindset of getting rich, fearing of missing out, and kind of just jumping into things without really understanding it. we're emotional beings and we make investment decisions based on emotions. And I think that's where a lot of people lose a lot of money. At the end of the day, I'm a big believer in education, whether it's free education, paid education, whatever it is. If there's something that you want to learn, go to someone that has done that before. Go to an experienced investor or an experienced professional and learn from them. Because what people do is they tend to look for the shortest or the quickest way to gain financially, and this tends to be the worst option for most people.
Yeah, I love that you said emotional, because people get so psyched up. Hey, I'm going to flip my first property. Let's design everything. Let's make it awesome. And you end up with having spent way too much money. And this is just when flipping property. I think the same happens when you're buying something you're going to rent out, or any type of property deal. So I love
I
that.
believe it's actually, that emotional intelligence is one of the most important skills that you should learn in life. Whether it's for investments, buying a car, buying a house, starting a family, whatever it might be, if you don't have the right emotional intelligence, you will make mistakes. So that's quite important.
What do you think of low income or low cost properties as an investment strategy?
I think the demand is there. We have a shortage of quality low income housing. I think it's something that can perform well. I'm not necessarily sure if it's the strategy that I want to follow, because there's certain risks that I'm not willing to take. Like I mentioned, I like taking calculated risk, and there's certain things that I can't calculate for when it comes to lower income housing. So one of the basic risks that you need to account for is vacancy, which is going to be much higher compared to mid-income property, and non-paying tenants, people that simply can't afford to make their rental payments. Those are probably two of the biggest factors that you need to account for when it comes to low-income housing. Personally, I don't feel it's worth the risk for me, but I do know people that has done very well with low-income housing.
Yeah, it's a super interesting market to me, and I feel a lot of people almost get tempted into buying that as their first investment property, because it's what they can afford, right?
Yeah.
So
I can buy a whole building in Joburg South for
under 2 million. Yeah, exactly. 10 flats. You know,
Yeah.
it seems like a great deal,
Yeah.
but you get into trouble if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's getting back to that same thing, right? Like, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. You know,
you're gonna lose money.
and you have to at some stage do your very first deal, but you can educate yourself in the process, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think of alternative investments to property? So let's compare property to, I don't know, crypto, gold, stocks.
I'm a big believer in property because of leverage. So with property, the main advantages that you have is leveraging the bank's money. You can benefit from principal pay down with properties. You can benefit from potential appreciation with properties, and even benefit from cash flow on a monthly basis. So being able to benefit in all these ways using other people's money is such a great way to grow your net worth. With other assets, specifically like crypto, if I had to ask you, what is Bitcoin actually? What is the purpose of Bitcoin? 99% of people won't be able to answer that question. They simply invest in it because of hype. And again, we want to take calculated risks. So of course, there's different investment vehicles out there that someone can explore, but I think the one that makes the most sense, and in my opinion is the safest, is property. When it comes to stocks, you are actually investing in a company. And what people do is they invest in a company that they know it might be like ShopRite or MTN, but they don't understand the fundamentals of the business. Why are you investing in this company? People again invest in these companies because they think it's a good investment. But once you start looking at the details, basically your balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement, you can quickly identify a good company and a bad company. And if you don't have the skills to identify the two companies, rather stay away from it, because chances are you're going to lose money.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying it's all about control, right? With a property, you have a lot of control. With stocks, you have no control.
Yeah, with property, it's very forgiving. It's very forgiving when you make mistakes. When you invest in a company or in a stock that has a bad financial position, it can take years, even decades, for that company to turn around, meaning your money is just sitting there and you're not generating any
Yeah.
income.
Yeah, I heard this comparison once of a guy that said, there's 3 ugly sisters. You get to choose only one to date. Which one? But they all look exactly the same. They're all ugly, so none of the, and they are related to the 3 investment classes, so stocks, real estate, and let's say just alternative. And they asked the question to the audience, which one do you date? Which one is the best option? And the short answer is the easiest one. So property is almost simple in that, right? You can paint a gutter, another place looks better.
Brick and mortar is just much simpler.
Yeah. So I've always kept that like in the back of my mind. It's like it's the easiest, most simple. Whereas I don't understand financial statements. I have no idea whether ShopRite is on its way up or down. By reading their financial statements of last year, and I hate the idea that a CEO can say something that's taken in a wrong way by masses, and you end up in losing money because of that. Completely out of my control.
You can't control the market.
Yeah. What do you think about the tax benefits for property owners or investors in South Africa? I know a lot of times in the US and US YouTube channels and training, we hear about all the tax benefits to people buying property in the US. What do we have like that in South Africa?
That's the cool thing about property, that there's many advantages or ways to reduce your taxes at the end of the day. If you're creating income and you have profit, you are going to end up paying taxes. Of course, we want to avoid paying taxes that it's not necessary to pay. So we can reduce our taxes by with stuff like interest, repairs and maintenance, commission, managing fees, and a whole list of other things that we can also reduce our taxes with.
Is that basic? So you're saying anything related to the income of the property or to the property, right?
Yeah, technically I see it as anything that helps you run your business can be used to reduce your taxes. There's a fine line between what you can deduct and what you can't, and that's why you need a good accountant or someone that knows the legalities.
And probably get your advice from him, not from us.
Yeah.
But in theory, you can deduct a lot of expenses.
Yeah, but there's basic things that all properties has, like rates and taxes. You use that to reduce your taxes or offset your income, basically. There's also tax strategies like the Section 13 Sex Act, where you can reduce your taxes over the longer term with new developments.
Yes, but that's something like new properties, and you have to own 5 of them.
That's correct, yeah. So you can write off the amount of that property over a certain period of time.
Yes, this is typically like the Americans can write off a property as the entire value of the property over 5 years or something like that. And this is a law in South Africa that's something similar, right?
Similar, yeah. But it's interesting with new developments. If you buy a new development property, it's going to be a shortfall property. So in any way, you're not creating income, so you're not paying taxes on a new development because you have a shortfall and no cash flow.
Yeah.
So
it's almost a mechanism to reduce taxes for your personal name or for your business or whatever.
Let's say you're a business owner that creates a large income and you don't want to pay taxes. You can use this act to reduce your taxes and still kind of invest in an asset or new
even something that's not
generating
cash flowing. Yeah. That's super interesting. Thanks, Louis. We really appreciate the advice and your know-how on this as well. I think we really touched on get yourself educated, and this is what I aim to do with this video, is to bring somebody in that really knows their field and is able to teach us about those things. So really thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, and we will see you guys on the next one.